If you were asked to summarize the Bible in one sentence or even one word, how would you do that? What would you choose to summarize? That's a difficult question for most people to answer, but one that's actually answered by the topic of biblical theology, which I want to address right now briefly. Our Sunday morning program, Sunday school, my goal for that is that when kids leave, they have a strong biblical theology. A biblical theology is simply, it's the big picture of the Bible. It looks at what's the central theme of the Bible. It looks at the Old Testament and the New Testament as one story with Jesus Christ at the center of it. And a lot of children's curriculums are guilty of teaching the Bible without seeing the big picture. They moralize Scripture. So what I mean by that, for example, is for a story like Noah and the Ark, that would be taught with the idea that a teacher might say, Noah was obedient. God told him to build the ark, and Noah did that. Therefore, you should be obedient to God. And that's not a bad application. That's just not the central application. And so rather than seeing the big picture of what that Bible story is teaching, it's teaching the ark is like Jesus Christ. There was 8 who were saved, and there was a whole world who was judged. And that Noah was obedient within that. It misses the central teaching, and it places an emphasis on the moralistic teaching of Scripture. And so we want, in our teaching with our kids, we want them to see the big picture of the Bible, really how it, in the Old Testament, foreshadows Christ, points to Christ, and how that's fulfilled in the New Testament. So everything that we do on Sunday morning attempts to teach children the big picture of the Bible. We have a 3-year rotation in a 6-year chunk. So kids will they'll get a biblical theology twice if they go through kindergarten through 6th grade, which is wonderful. It gets a little more generalized in the younger ages and more specific as they get older. But I want to help you learn biblical theology in there's 4 main themes of Scripture. I remember them by the words creation, fall, redemption, and restoration or consummation. In creation, we see that in Genesis 1 through 2. God created the world good. That's what I tell our kids. That's how they remember it. God created the world good. The fall we see in Genesis 3. Sin made the world groan, and it messed up God's created order. And then from Genesis 3:15 until about Revelation 20 or 21, we have redemption. So the problem is sin, and God's answer to that problem is Jesus Christ's death on the cross, His atonement, how He pays for our sin with His blood and takes our place for those who place their faith in Jesus and respond to Him. So God made the world good, sin made the world groan. Jesus broke the chains of sin, and the last one is restoration. God made the world new. God took what was distorted and broken and made that new and wonderful. And as Christians, we have a hope. We can look forward to a day where there is no more death and no more sin, no more pain. And of course, that's a picture of eternity in heaven. And that's a joyful thing. And so if we asked our kids, what's the Bible all about? What's the one word? We might say it's Jesus. Although that tells us everything and nothing at the same time to say that. So we need to go a little bit further. So I like to tell our teachers that a great sentence to summarize the Bible is God's glory in salvation through judgment. And we see that repeated again and again. In fact, it becomes like a broken record in Scripture. Whether it is the story of Noah and the ark, or David and Goliath, or the Battle of Jericho, you pick the story, that theme is there. So ultimately, the Bible isn't about humans. The Bible is about God and His greatness and His majesty, and that's displayed through every page. So it's about God's glory. But it's also, God is glorified then in salvation. He was made to look great by saving Noah and the 8 total family members. but he was also made to look great in the judgment of those who are judged. And both reflect both the holiness and the grace of God. And so when we are teaching an individual lesson, we want to make sure that we see those parts in the whole, and that kids can get that. And as children get older, once they move into the 5th and 6th grade area, then we start teaching them some systematic theology, and they start looking at some of the themes of Scripture doctrinally, such as who is Jesus Christ, who is the Trinity, who is God the Father, what's sin and what does that mean, and we can trace those threads all throughout Scripture as well. So as you are teaching on Sunday morning, also on Wednesday night, but if you're teaching on Sunday morning, that's the approach that I want, and I would love for you to say with our kids that they would be able to say, God made the world good, sin made the world groan, Jesus broke the chains of sin, and God made the world new. Creation, fall, redemption, and restoration. We want you to highlight that. I have a resource for you to teach a biblical theology. It's a book called According to Plan. You can pick it up in the Children's Ministry office. I want you to spend time reading this. A number of people have found the first 3 or 4 chapters difficult to get through. If you can get through them, please do so. If you're finding it's just tough sledding, then jump to, I'll tell you what chapter here. Jump to chapter 4 and begin reading from there, and you'll get a pretty clear picture of what I'm talking about. And that will, I think, equip you even further in order to implement the teaching that we have on Sunday morning. So as you teach a biblical theology, we want you to understand what the center of the Scripture is, that everything points back to and flows out of. And I believe that will help our young people have a trust in the unity of the Bible, that it's one central story, and the authority of the Bible, that it's not just this history book, that it's not a weird conglomeration of documents that are just thrown together, but there is great coherency in their bringing together. And I think it strengthens a person's faith when you see that God authored a book with so many different authors over such a long period of time that says the exact same story. There's no way that that could happen by chance. But in that, we want our children to see a great vision of who God is, what He has done, to be captivated by Him, to treasure Jesus Christ, and to be encouraged to explore and study the Scriptures for themselves. And we trust that as we open up the Bible, that God's Spirit will work through that in the lives of our kids in a way that we can't change hearts or transform them, but God can. And so we trust that He will be at work as we are faithful to explaining and applying the Scriptures to the children in our midst.